Welcome to U.S. History to 1877. In this course, you will survey the major themes, events, and ideas of American history through Reconstruction.
I'm Jordan O'Connell, History and Government Instructor at Northeast Iowa Community College. This lecture distills a decade of my written notes taken from Alan Brinkley's The Unfinished Nation, the American Yawp, and our course-assigned OpenStax U.S. History textbook. This lecture focuses on Las Casas, the Requerimiento, and colonial memory. The core question is this: how did imperial law and memory turn cooperation and conflict with Native peoples into stories that justified colonial power? The core competency is to relate incidents of both cooperation and conflict between European colonizers and Native peoples. What happens when an empire turns conquest into paperwork and teaches later generations to call seizure lawful order? Colonial violence did not depend on battlefield force alone. Empires also needed records, formulas, and public language that made coercion appear lawful. The early Spanish Empire developed some of the clearest examples. Royal agents, priests, conquistadors, and local officials all participated in a system that used documents, rituals, and labor rules to convert invasion into a governable process. The record already settles the fact of conquest violence. The harder issue is how imperial institutions cleaned that violence while it was happening and after it had already reordered land and labor. The Requerimiento shows that process in concentrated form. Drafted in the early 16th century, the document announced the authority of the Pope and the Spanish crown and demanded indigenous submission. Spanish representatives were supposed to read it aloud before beginning hostilities. The performance created a paper trail of justification. If Native communities refused the claims of a foreign king and a foreign church, Spanish officials could say that lawful submission had been offered and rejected. The procedure worked even when no meaningful understanding existed. The document might be read in Spanish to people who did not know the language. It might be read at night from a ship or at a distance. It might be delivered to an empty shoreline and then recorded as completed. The point was not mutual agreement. The point was documentary cover. Once a clerk or commander could say that the required words had been spoken, imperial violence could be presented as enforcement rather than aggression. This method deserves close attention because it links law and force directly. A conquest needed soldiers, but it also needed legitimacy that could travel back to courts, councils, and archives. Paperwork made the violence portable. It allowed later officials to inherit a record that described procedure rather than seizure. The Requerimiento therefore belongs beside weapons, ships, and forts as one of the operating tools of conquest. The same logic would appear in other colonial settings through treaties tilted by unequal power, missionary routines, and legal categories that narrowed native claims. Spain's version is unusually explicit, which makes it useful for understanding the broader pattern. Colonizers rarely describe themselves as simple invaders. They preferred the language of authority, civilization, protection, and right. The Spanish Empire in the Americas faced a practical governing problem after conquest. How could it extract labor, collect tribute, and expand Christian authority over conquered populations? Encomienda became one answer. Under this system, Spanish colonists received the right to collect tribute and labor from indigenous communities while supposedly providing protection and religious instruction in return. The arrangement was never a neutral exchange. It tied native labor directly to colonial wealth and treated Christian obligation as the language that excused the extraction. Missions reinforced the same structure. Priests sought conversion, but mission settlements also reorganized space, labor, and family routines. Under imperial supervision, indigenous communities could be relocated, scheduled, and disciplined more easily when religious instruction and colonial rule worked together. Mission bells, work assignments, and catechism lessons formed part of one routine. Faith and administration were not separate spheres in that environment. They operated as linked systems. These institutions developed inside a wider imperial context shaped by conquest in the Caribbean, Mexico, and other parts of the Americas. Spanish officials needed tribute, agricultural production, and stable settlements. Colonists wanted land and labor. Priests wanted souls and influence. The crown wanted order and revenue. Encomienda and mission structures served all of those interests unevenly, but effectively enough to last. The alternatives did exist in theory. Spanish authorities could have recognized indigenous sovereignty more fully, limited settlement, or constrained local colonists more aggressively. Some debates in Spain address the moral status of native peoples and the proper limits of conquest. Those debates deserve attention, but the daily machinery on the ground carried greater force. Local officials, settlers, and priests kept labor and land moving through routine enforcement. That practical level is where imperial power became durable. By the 17th century, other empires developed different institutional forms, yet the the same broad problem remained. English colonists in New England and Virginia relied less on the requirimiento and less on formal mission systems, but they still used deeds, charters, courts, and war to make domination look legitimate. Spain provides a vivid example because its legal theater and labor systems remain so visible in the record. Bartolomé de las Casas stands near the center of the record because he described conquest from within the Spanish imperial world. He had seen colonization closely and turned against its cruelty. In 1552, he published A Short Account of the Destruction of the Indies, a furious description of massacre, torture, forced labor, and depopulation in the Americas. He did not write as an outsider to empire. He wrote as a friar who believed Christian monarchy had fallen into moral disaster. Las Casas is useful precisely because he is difficult to simplify. He condemned brutality, yet he still operated inside a framework where empire and conversion remained real categories. His criticism shows that people at the time could see the horror clearly. The violence did not hide from everyone. That fact weakens any later excuse that conquest was simply a tragic misunderstanding. Contemporary witnesses recognize greed, slaughter, and labor exploitation for what they were. Spanish settlers and officials operated under different pressures. Conquistadors wanted reward for service. Colonial elites wanted dependable labor. Governors wanted stability and tribute. Priests wanted influence over souls and settlements. The crown wanted revenue while also limiting disorder that might weaken royal control. Those pressures often collided, but none of them favored native sovereignty as the governing priority. A parallel story unfolded in English North America under different names. By 1675, Metacom, known to the English as King Philip, confronted colonial expansion in southern New England. English settlement had spread, livestock damaged native fields, missionaries sought conversions, courts pressed native communities, and land transfers kept reducing indigenous independence. Metacom and allied native peoples faced the prospect of permanent subordination inside a settler order that claimed legality for itself. King Philip's War grew from those accumulated pressures. English colonists later remembered the conflict as a desperate defense of order, but native leaders understood it as resistance to encroachment. War devastated native communities and English towns alike. The conflict ended with a major reduction of native power in southern New England and a stronger English hold on land. The machinery differed from Spanish encomienda, yet the result still joined war, law, and memory in the service of colonial dominance. Las Casas wrote that the Spaniards made some progress in this work of destruction. The line reveals the pressure because it reverses imperial vocabulary. Progress usually suggests order, growth, and improvement. Las Casas uses the word to describe ruin. The sentence identifies conquest as a structured process rather than a collection of isolated cruelties. Armies, settlers, and administrators were making progress and destruction because empire organized them to do so. Pair that witness with the requirimiento, and a sharp tension appears. One document names the violence plainly. The other document stages legality to excuse it. The empire could generate moral testimony and legal camouflage at the same time. That double record is one reason colonial memory remains so contested. Archives preserve both horror and justification, often with the justification carrying more institutional weight. The Black Legend added another layer. Protestant and especially English writers seized on Spanish atrocities to portray Spain as uniquely savage, fanatical, and backward. The critique had factual basis because Spanish conquest produced unmistakable brutality. Yet the critique also served rival powers. If Spain could be marked as the worst empire, English expansion could present itself as comparatively restrained, even while English settlers displaced native peoples, waged destructive wars, and normalized land seizure through courts and charters. This is how the Black Legend functioned geopolitically. It was not only a moral accusation, it was a tool in imperial competition. Pamphlets, sermons, and political commentary could use Spanish cruelty to clear moral space for English colonization. England could say, in effect, that its empire was more lawful because Spain's empire was monstrous. The comparison obscured the violence inside English projects of settlement and expansion. The primary source tension therefore runs in two directions. Las Casas exposes conquest honestly from within Spain. English and Protestant readers can then repurpose that exposure to strengthen their own imperial self-image. A truthful account becomes a rival's instrument. That pattern should caution any reader against assuming that condemnation automatically produces justice. A denunciation can also become propaganda. The immediate effects of conquest were bodily and territorial. Indigenous communities lost land, labor autonomy, population, and political leverage. Encomienda extracted tribute. Missions reorganized daily life. Wars such as King Philip's War broke communities and opened more ground to colonial expansion. Those facts belong to the first layer of consequence. The second layer formed through memory. Once colonial power secured territory, they also shaped the language through which later generations would remember what happened. Words such as settlement, pacification, conversion, and protection softened conquest. Legal records narrowed indigenous resistance into rebellion or disorder. Monuments, sermons, and school histories later repeated those terms until the paperwork started to look like reality itself. The requerimiento stands at the beginning of that process because it shows the empire rehearsing its own innocence before the violence is complete. Read the declaration, record the refusal, march forward, and preserve the file. Later administrators inherit a document trail that makes conquest look procedural. The same general logic appears when English charters and courts convert native land pressure into tidy claims of lawful possession. The Black Legend extended the afterstory across imperial borders. Spain became the designated villain of colonial brutality, which allowed English and other Protestant powers to build cleaner national myths for themselves. A narrow focus on Spanish cruelty misses the larger fact that rival empires used that cruelty rhetorically while continuing their own colonization. The memory problem, therefore, is larger than falsehood versus truth. It is selective truth used for political gain. King Philip's War illustrates how durable such selectivity can become. English memory long emphasized settler fear and native violence while giving less space to decades of land loss, court pressure, and missionary intrusion that framed the conflict. The archive records native resistance, but dominant storytelling often strips the resistance of its cause. Colonial power survives in that narrowing. Printed sermons, captivity narratives, and official histories then carried that narrowing outward. Once those texts circulated in English towns and later in American schools and civic memory, selective memory gained a larger public audience than native testimony usually could command. The printed archive favored the victors because the victors controlled presses, offices, and preservation. Colonial memory also entered maps, property disputes, and local commemorations. A place name could celebrate a conqueror. A court record could preserve one version of ownership for generations. A town anniversary could praise founding, while leaving seizure unspoken. Memory therefore survived in routine civic forms as well as in books. A republic that inherits only the softened story inherits damaged civic language. If conquest becomes order and seizure becomes settlement, later generations lose the words needed to describe coercion clearly. That is the long consequence of colonial memory. The archive preserves events and distributes moral permission through the way it frames them. It distributes moral permission. The unresolved judgment lies between force and explanation. Conquest required soldiers, labor systems, and land seizure. It also required documents, sermons, and later stories that made the seizure sound necessary or lawful. The violence and the memory worked together. The first won territory. The second taught later people how to live with the result. The violence itself is no longer the only issue once conquest has archives, sermons, and civic myths protecting it. The harder judgment is what a republic inherits when its public language softens coercion into order and settlement. A people can recover harder words for power, or keep living inside the permission granted by the cleaned-up record.
If you're curious how I'm using AI to build these lectures and reshape higher education, visit thelibertytolearn.com. I'll see you in class.